Welcome back, WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and WNST.net. Big win for the Terps on Tuesday night. How big of a win? Well, to put it into historic perspective, I welcome in our WNST historic historian. Luke Jones joins us here. He, of course, can be found, Luke, at WNST.net, as well as Baltimore Luke on the Twitter thing. And, you were amongst many, Don Marcus, many of our friends out there who love college basketball. Of course, Don was out in the middle of Iowa doing it. We were not, but I remember we were there for the Purdue game, which seems like a long time ago. Purdue was ranked. Terps lost a close one that day. They've lost a lot of close ones to ranked teams. This one would have gone the other way, but it didn't go the other way, right? So we don't get to talk about that anymore, right?
That's right. It wasn't a pretty game by any means. In fact, I quipped in the first half that at one point it at least improved from completely unwatchable to this is really tough to watch. But
when the Terps moved to the Big Ten, this is the game that I thought, oh my God, right?
Exactly. This is the 50-46 kind of game that you always watch from afar. Big Ten basketball, and then when you found out Maryland was going there, you're like, oh my goodness. And this one felt that way, but you mentioned the historical perspective. You have to go back to the day that John Harbaugh was introduced as the head coach of the Baltimore Ravens. Remember that? That was a long time ago. That had been the last time that Maryland had beaten a ranked team on the road. They went into the Dean Dome. They beat number 1 North Carolina on January 19th, 2008. So what? 11 years, 1 month exactly between road victories over a ranked opponent. And look, do I think that Iowa team was particularly good? No, but you kind of look at what kind of mojo they had going recently with some buzzer beater shots and some magic in that regard. And when you're a team that hasn't had a road win over a ranked opponent for that long, even regardless of what it means for their NCAA tournament seeding and resume and what kind of quality win it might be, I think there's absolutely a psychological lift that you get from a win like that, even if it wasn't very pretty.
He is Luke Jones. He is Luke at WNST.net. And, of course, the Terps, I don't know what this win means for them, right? Like, I try to put these things into perspective to say at some point you want to see them win one of these games, right? Not just play well. We know they have good players. I don't know that any of this matters till seedings come out and all that, but I know this matters when you wind up on the bubble because you don't win a couple of these late games that are sitting on the schedule. And perhaps that's where we are right now, with the Terps to say, well, does it matter if they won or not? Well, it matters to us stop talking about Turgeon's job security and all of that, but all of that becomes more apparent in 3 weeks when they get a seeding and they need to win basketball games in March. I mean, I guess we talk so much about the Ravens this year needing to make the playoffs. The Terps don't just need to make the tournament and have some cursory, thing where they lose to a 12 seed or something like that. They need to be a better team than that, and I feel like they are. I feel like on a night-by-night basis they go out and they've been as credible a team as we've had around here in a number of years and a team that gives me some hope for them in March. And this is the kind of game that would do that. But, my God, they were horrific in the first half. They have had long stretches of nothingness in lots of ways where you say, hey, Bruno, you want to be a lottery pick? A lot of these the young players on the team to say step up. There have been missing minutes for lots of these guys at various points, but I like all of them individually, and I say when they put it all together, they'll get a big win. They're going to need to have a big win. If your signature win is a tip-in win in Iowa over 12 years on the road, that's not saying much, man.
Well, and that's why Mark Turgeon has, in many ways, fairly come under fire in his tenure. I mean, when you haven't had that kind of a win. And again, like you said, I mean, it's not as though Iowa's a top 5 juggernaut Final Four contender, but they were ranked. And again, when you're talking about a team that hasn't done that in such a long time, you'll take it. But you're right. I mean, what an ugly game. I'm going back and just revisiting some of the tweets, not just on our own WNST Twitter, but anyone who was watching the game. And, about halfway through the first half, Maryland was shooting 8% from the field. And what was amazing about it, though, and credit their defense. I mean, I think quietly they've defended well. I know they had their issues at Michigan on Saturday. I mean, pretty listless performance. Not that I was shocked that they lost, but I would like to have seen a more consistent effort. But I think quietly, while they've had some guys that have struggled, I mean, Cowan has really struggled until Tuesday night. He hit 5 3-pointers and made some big shots for them, but he struggled. But their defense, I think, has been a big part of what they've been able to do over the last 6, 7, 8, 9 games, where you look at how often they've been on the road, and their defense is what really carried them for stretches of Tuesday's game, because they had issues against the zone. They made some shots here and there, and every time you thought they were getting ready to pull away, then Iowa would answer, and Maryland would miss a shot or two to kind of keep the Hawkeyes in it. But I think you just look at that first half and how poorly they played on the offensive end, and yet they were right there, and then they were winning it. So it was just such a strange game. Again, big picture, what does it mean? Sure, it helps their NCAA tournament profile. It keeps them in position to get a double bye in the Big Ten tournament. I know going into Tuesday's action, they were kind of, the consensus is they've kind of been hovering around that 6 line. So you'd like to get that a little bit better, and I think they have some opportunities to do that. Of course, they have a big rematch with Michigan coming up, where they're going to play in College Park, so that'll be a great opportunity for them. But I think you hope that this is part of the graduation process. I mean, you mentioned how where this team kind of ranks compared to some other Mark Turgeon teams, and you go back to the Sweet 16 team a couple years back with some of the hired guns, transfers, what have you, and you knew that team had one run, and then guys were going to be gone. Whereas this year, even though you expect Bruno Fernando to go pro, considering where he kind of stacks up in most NBA mock drafts, but you have a lot of young guys who are contributing in very meaningful ways. So there's a thought to get to the NCAA tournament, see what happens. You'd love to get to the second weekend. I think this team has the potential to be able to do that if they get the right draw and they play consistently enough. But until you get to that point, you're always looking for signs that you've turned the corner in some way. And I think as excited as everyone was about the win over Purdue and the way they played in the second half, then it was a big thud in Ann Arbor on Saturday. Again, no shame in losing to Michigan, but anyone who watched that game, at no point did
it wasn't
really
close.
Think the Terps. I mean, it was on the scoreboard. It wasn't as lopsided as it felt. It never really felt like a game the Terps were going to win, or really felt like they had a good chance to win. So for them to go to Iowa, and look, it was ugly as sin for large stretches of that game, and they almost choked it away. This conversation could have been very, very different.
Oh, yeah, and I guess that's my point. My point is, if the conversation's different over a point, what have we learned here?
Right.
I don't think we're going to learn anything here until they get a seeding and win some games in March. Because I think we all look at them and say on a night-by-night basis they're capable. But to your point, against Michigan, against some of the better teams, I mean, you can go back to Seton Hall if you want, but I tend to leave that sort of stuff alone and say, how have they looked in their big games at home, on the road? They were very credible against Virginia earlier, and they've played well in big games at certain points. That just needs to happen 6 weeks from now, and not 6 weeks, 4 weeks from now, right?
Right, and at some point, just playing well doesn't cut it anymore. You know what I'm saying?
Fair enough, sure.
It's in the same way that Turgeon teams got to the NCAA tournament, and then it's like, okay, well, getting there, that should kind of be what the bar is every year. And I know they're not going to make it every single year, but this program, there's no reason why it shouldn't get back to the point where it's just expected that you're going to make the NCAA tournament, and then you hope you mix in quite a few Sweet 16 runs in there, and then you hope that special team comes around that you can get back to a Final Four one day. I'm not expecting that every year. I'm not saying Maryland is Duke, but the standard should be higher than, frankly, it's been around here for a long time. And I'll even go back to the end of the Gary Williams era. So I'm not just going to put that all on Mark Turgeon, but I think this team, with the way that they have young guys that have contributed, whether it's an Ayala, whether it's Wiggins hitting shots off the bench, bench. Lindo giving them energy at different times. Of course, I mean, even though Sticks didn't have a big game on Tuesday night, we know what he's been able to do for them. So they have so many young guys that they've counted on, and it's been fun. So fun. Quite often in watching those guys contribute, but you also know that there are going to be some growing pains. But
yeah, the times where they can't inbound the ball, and the times they're taking ill-advised shots, and all of that, right?
Yeah, I mean, there are things that still make you scratch your head, and even coaching elements that still make me scratch my head. That I'm not the biggest Mark Turgeon guy in the world.
I haven't found anybody that is. I mean, maybe that's...
I feel like the national media is and no one else is. I mean, like you hear these national types say how good of a coach he is, and my thing is, the players are different, but they have the same exact issues, the same exact problems. They start games cold, as they did on Tuesday night. They have late-game mishaps. And when it's different players continuing to make the same mistakes, that's when I do question the coaching. But even if the end of Tuesday's game was unsettling and they were very close to choking that one away.
And Iowa had won a bunch of games just like that, right?
Exactly. That's
their calling card.
I don't know how good Iowa really is, but they'd won some games. They'd pulled some games out.
Boy, 5 minutes into the game, I'm like, PU. The game's 3-2, and it's 14 minutes into, and I'm like, what? I mean, I thought, man, this is a team that's going to muck it up with you and cause you to lose ugly on a winter night in the middle of the West, right?
Yeah, and it was a strange game in the sense that it went against some trends. I mean, Maryland forced Iowa to commit a lot of turnovers in the first half, and that's something that Iowa typically doesn't do. Maryland did some uncharacteristic things, so it was just a weird game. I mean, we talk about this all the time. Not that I don't want to disparage Iowa's basketball program, because they've done some good things over the history of their program. Maybe they haven't been to the pinnacle, but they've made Final Fours, they've made Sweet 16s and Elite Eights, so it's not as though they're completely devoid of success. But we always talk about some of these weeknight games, and I don't think the atmosphere was the problem as much as just how poorly these teams started. And I think fans are sitting on their hands when you watch a game like that. I mean, I know midway through the first half, I was thinking, boy, I really love my job, but watching this game tonight feels like work. I mean, that's what kind of performance it felt like. But again, Maryland figured out a way to start hitting some shots, specifically in the second half, and they never quite pulled away, and that almost cost them dearly at the end. But you just hope, even if this isn't a top 5 team that they beat, but you hope them getting over the hump lifts that psychological block that might have been there. And I know Turgeon dismissed it after the game. I saw his press conference. He was very much playing the card of, I didn't even know that streak existed, and people were texting me, and I didn't know what they were talking about. But you know that he knew that, and you know that the players were aware that they hadn't beaten a ranked team on the road. And it's a young team, but still, until you do something like that, it's tougher to envision doing bigger things. And now that Maryland, they come home now, they've played 3 of the last 4 in the regular season at home, which is big, and knowing that the Michigan game is going to be a huge opportunity for them. So they're not going to have a chance to get a bigger road win, but knowing that they're going to be playing on neutral floors come March, this is a nice one to have, even if, again, aesthetically, it doesn't blow you away with how either of these teams played, quite frankly.
He is Luke Jones. He is Baltimore Luke, out on Twitter, as well as Luke at WNST.net, doing all things Ravens as well. Greg Roman speaking earlier this week. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by, I'm going to go through all of our sponsors here and give them some love here. We've had some snow. We've had some cold days. Certainly our conversation continues. Curio Wellness, I'm wearing the Curio shirt. A lot of folks think it looks like a Lamar, but it's not. It's an O, and it's a Curio. If you're curious about medical cannabis, they're there for you. They are the professionals, and they're committed to educating folks about that. But it's a holistic wellness facility as well. Very open, very inviting. Come on in, learn more. It's CurioWellness.com. And they are on York Road, just south of Timonium Road. go see our friends there and see Brian. He'll be joining us every other week here on the air. Also, Strategic Factory, creating your masterpiece. They do hats like this and shirts like this, including this shirt, including this cup. They do marketing, printing, promotional goods of all kinds. Keith's going to be joining us here this week as well. Big shout out to Strategic Factory. They're local. StrategicFactory.com is the way to find them. LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute. Dr. Craig Bennett joining us this week to talk orthopedics. I'm going to wear my Stan Stasiak arm thing, and he's going to explain how it works and why it works. He's also working with my wife and her little frozen shoulder injury right now. LifeBridge Health Sports Medicine Institute in Owings Mills. They are the new game plan for sports-related injuries. They're great friends of ours. They've been awesome. Dr. Kevin Crutchfield comes on every other week. We talk about concussion and really important stuff that I learned about at the Super Bowl as well. Don't want to forget our friends at Patrick's in Essex. It's been a little while since we were down there with Matt Skura, but I know out on Thursday night they're doing steak dinner night there in the prime rib for just $11.99. Taco Monday, Shrimp Tuesday, making me hungry. The folks at Patrick's in Essex. Great bands, cold beer, and never a cover. We'll see you down in Essex at Pat Rick's. Luke, you were in Owings Mills from one side of town to the other. It's quiet, but the Ravens are trying to at least stay relevant and while this spring training thing happens with the Orioles, and we're talking Terps. The Ravens are a week out now on getting on a plane. They're going out to Indianapolis. You and I are conscientious objectors to the Combine this year. We'll be watching from afar in the Underwear Olympics, but it's quiet right now, but it's about to get loud again, right? I mean, it's about to get real loud after the Flacco thing.
It is, and obviously we're kind of waiting to see if the Ravens use the franchise tag on C.J. Mosley. It's hefty. I'm inclined to say no on that, but at least the possibility you hope drives some contract talks. Hope that you get a deal across the finish line before he hits the market. But there's that. There's the decisions on guys like Jimmy Smith and Eric Weddle. So clearly the front office and the scouting department is focused on the Combine. That's kind of the next order for business. But as you know, Nestor, with the number of agents and executives and coaches that are in Indianapolis, that's where a lot of business gets done. That's the unofficial start of free agency. And I guess you could make an argument that some of the tampering goes on behind closed doors even before that. But
the pre-tampering before the tampering, yes.
But Indianapolis, it's well known that a lot of business is conducted there that goes beyond the draft. So this is certainly the time of year where business starts to pick up. Even if it doesn't make it out to the media, there's a lot going on. And with the Ravens, I think what's interesting in hearing Greg Roman talk on Tuesday, for anyone like us who has been questioning how sustainable their offense was in the second half of the season and what they were going to do with Lamar Jackson and what Greg Roman was going to bring to this offense as the coordinator replacing Marty Morningwig, Roman made it very clear that they are, quote, reimagining this offense from the ground up, and even equated it to almost being like a brand new coaching staff coming to a team and implementing their system. They have completely scrubbed this thing down, and they're rebuilding it. He spoke about using some collegiate elements in terms of how players are being taught offense at the college level, talking about calling plays, huddling, tempo, all those types of things are being incorporated and pondered as they revamp their system. And, of course, it's all being built around Lamar Jackson in trying to really emphasize his strengths and doing what you can to cover up for his weaknesses. And it's very much still going to be about the running game. I think we all understand that at this point, but the biggest key is still going to be how he grows as a passer going from year one to year two. And I think Roman really shared some interesting thoughts on that. He said what we already know. He needs to work on his mechanics, his passing fundamentals. But what he did say, and this is something that if you go back and watch Lamar Jackson, he spoke a lot about how much he likes his vision, saying how he sees the field. It's one thing to talk about whether he's accurate enough, and that's going to be a very real question, and that's been a real question and a real weakness for plenty of quarterbacks who ultimately didn't make it. But he said in terms of Jackson seeing the field, he actually reminds him a little bit of Steve McNair going back to Greg Roman's first stint with the Ravens a little over a decade ago. So I thought that was an interesting insight that he shared. Again, time will tell how Jackson develops, but that's what the coaching staff is busy doing right now, where I think we kind of get our our indirect answer as far as how sustainable the system the Ravens were running late last year, well, they're redesigning it. So that should tell you that they clearly understood that what they were doing wasn't going to just be the complete blueprint moving forward. So it'll be interesting to see how that evolves come spring and summer. But in the meantime, Eric DeCosta and company very busy getting ready for the Combine. And, we're less than a month away from the start of free agency, and lots of decisions still to be made for the Ravens that go beyond trading their former quarterback, as we know won't be official yet, but we know that item of business is already taken care of. But lots of other dominoes still to fall for whatever this roster is going to look like in 2019.
I know next week we'll talk more about this, Luke, and about the Combine, because we're not going, and it really is conscientious object. We didn't do great radio there. We didn't get a lot of work done there. The league is restricted access in ways, and it's a little bit of a circus, and we just didn't want to participate. So we get as much done from here. But part of the conversation that I've heard more in the last 5 years, and I know we've talked about it, I remember sitting in that little ballroom where no one was last year and talking about it, is how much the college game is different than the pro game. And I know Greg Roman got into that a little bit, but especially when evaluating quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson, and you want to play more of a college style, the hash marks, just everything about the way the game lines up and the kind of players you have and the style of play and the way you want to play is different than the way the NFL has traditionally been set up. And the Ravens are, for better or worse, and maybe one day we're writing Raven Ball, right? That they are changing the rules of the game a little bit in a more untraditional way. And I keep going back to this. A pretty key person in the Ravens organization sent me a text last year in the wee hours after the Lamar Jackson draft pick was there, and the word experiment was brought up. And it will be an experiment if they win a Super Bowl with Lamar Jackson or with this offense, because no one else has ever done it.
Well, I think so much of it, this really just comes down to context, and you look at what the rest of the league is doing right now. It's all about the passing game. Even analytics say you pass on first down. If you throw an incompletion, don't run on second down. You throw. I mean, this is all research supported. It's not as though teams just decided, we're bored with running the football, we're going to throw it. Throwing the football is a more efficient way to win in the NFL, assuming you have the right pieces in place. So when you have a league that is so far toward the passing game, and that's not to say the run doesn't have value, but it's clearly not what teams are built around anymore. It's not the building block that an offense is built around anymore. Well, the Ravens are trying to go against the grain here. They have a very unique quarterback in terms of his skill set. I think it's very clear Lamar Jackson still must develop further as a passer. I think they acknowledge that. At the same time, their blueprint is not for Lamar Jackson to become a 40-pass-a-game kind of guy either. There's going to be a sweet spot here, and Greg Roman even talked about it. He equated it to like kneading dough, where you're just trying to get that right formula, that right mix. But they're going to be driven by the run, and I guess you can make an argument, and we saw some of this last year, although after a while I don't think it was any secret what the Ravens were trying to do, but you have all these defenses in the NFL that are built to do what? Try to stop the pass, because that's what the game is driven by in this day and age, and the Ravens are essentially going to continue to try to zig while everyone else is zagging. Now, they need more balance. They can't continue to have a 2-to-1 ratio in terms of run to pass. I think it's going to be closer to a 50-50 kind of ratio. I don't know exactly what it'll be. It's going to be dictated by game situation. But what Roman talked about, and I touched on this briefly, but he talked about how college football is different, how quarterbacks, and not just quarterbacks, but all offensive players are being taught the game differently. I mean, it's one thing to talk about what was done 10, 20 years ago, but you look now, I mean, teams aren't even huddling. We've talked about offensive linemen, how they don't get in three-point stances, and certainly there's adaptations that have to be made to the NFL game. But
maybe the Ravens are looking for players that other teams aren't looking for. You know what I'm saying? That if they're going to run this offense this way, they're going to be looking for a different style of player than maybe others are. I mean, maybe there is a market inefficiency lying underneath of all of this. If this is the way they're going to play, and the Falcons and the Patriots are going to continue to play the Joe Montana way, for lack of a better expression, right?
Yeah, and I think there's something to that, although at the end of the day, it is still just football. I mean,
well, John Elway certainly wants to play it that way. He signed up Joe Flacco, right? They're going to be looking for different types of players, running backs, all of that, than especially in a Kubiak system there, right, where they had a little bit of a blend a couple of years ago, if we go back to the Justin Forsett era here and all of that stuff. But running a college plan is something that the other 31 executives get together and say, man, I love this player, but I don't know how it's going to work in my scheme, because everyone's projecting just throwing it out there, because no one else has tried to do it this way in a long time. I mean, the Wildcat offense aside, right? Right. I mean, it's definitely there are definitely some elements that are different here, and I mean, let's also use some comparisons with what Greg Roman did in San Francisco with Jim Harbaugh and Colin Kaepernick. Greg Roman did some of these things in Buffalo before he was unceremoniously let go by Rex Ryan. So it's not as though this is brand new, but it is different, and it is going against the grain. And as far as players the Ravens might value, Roman echoed what Eric DeCosta said a few weeks back about wanting wide receivers that have the ability to block. Well, as long as they still find some wide receivers who have traditional traits, which they've had problems finding those wide receivers who can, catch the ball and make plays in the passing game, they're still going to need that. So it's well and good to say that. I think the one position that to me has really jumped out as far as being valued a little bit differently in Greg Roman's offense, and I'll even go back to 2017 where Greg Roman was still in charge of the running game. I think the tight end position, I think you can very clearly see that the Ravens value that position a little bit more. It's probably why they took 2 tight ends in the first 3 rounds of the draft. It's probably why I still view Nick Boyle as someone that they want to try to keep, or Max Williams, at least one of those guys, because of their blocking acumen. I think that's something that really stands out that maybe other teams wouldn't value. But at the end of the day, they want a good offensive line. Still think they're looking to upgrade left guard or center. In a perfect world, you upgrade both. I don't know if they're going to be able to do that, but you'd like to get at least one upgrade there. They need to look at wide receiver. I asked Roman about the possibility of a pass-catching running back and I didn't even ask this with the thought of anyone that's dreaming about the Ravens pursuing someone like Le'Veon Bell, but just in general, the pass-catching element of a running back that they've lacked since Ray Rice. They tried to do it with Woodhead a couple years ago, and we know that didn't work. But it was interesting to hear Roman say, yeah, that's certainly part of it, but that's not really – he didn't really express a sentiment that that's a big-time priority for them. I think they're looking for running backs who run the ball effectively, and then if it's someone that has receiving ability, they'll try to maximize that. They'll try to take advantage of that. But it doesn't sound as though the Ravens are looking for a specific running back to fill a Danny Woodhead, Darren Sproles kind of a role in their offensive attack. They're very much looking for running backs to be part of a stable, which was the word that Greg Roman used. So I think from that regard, not that I expected it anyway, but probably shouldn't be holding your breath for the Ravens to be going out there throwing a 8-figure contract at Le'Veon Bell or anything crazy like that. So. Yeah, I don't expect anything, massive in the signing way like that. I think they're going to go into the draft and try to get better football players there. That's always been sort of their MO.
Yeah, I mean, I could see a scenario where maybe they go after a Matt Paradis, the center for the Broncos. I could see something like that, but a Le'Veon Bell type. I mean, I look at the wide receivers that are going to hit the free agent market, and I'm not sure who that guy's going to be. They're certainly not that wide receiver one that you're dreaming about. I mean, if you're going to find that guy, it's probably going to be in the draft, and someone that ends up being better than his draft evaluation indicates. So, I think, again, for me, it still comes back to what do they do with Mosley? Do they get a deal done with him? What do they do with Weddle? What do they do with Suggs? What happens with Jimmy Smith? What happens with Brandon Carr? I assume Brandon Carr is going to be back, but he's still someone that's kind of in that tier of conversation. So once I get an idea of where the Ravens stand with those individuals, then you get a much better idea of how active they might be on the free agent market. I mean, if this team decides that what C.J. Mosley's asking for or what he's going to get on the open market is too rich for their blood, and they move on from a couple other vets on the defensive side of the ball, then all bets are off. They might go after some big-time free agents because they'll have a lot of cap space, and this will be a pretty markedly different football team. But if they stray more towards being conservative and keeping what they have, and maybe Jimmy Smith is the only notable cut that they make, and they keep Weddle, they bring back Suggs, they strike a deal with Mosley, then yeah, it's going to be more second, third tier type free agent signings like it typically is, and they're going to be looking towards the draft. So
yeah, they're going to give Weddle $9.5 million. They're not going to have a whole lot left for anybody else.
Yeah. So and look, I'm not saying that they should stand.
I don't think they are going to do that with Weddle because I don't think anybody else in the marketplace would give him more than 3 right now, right?
Yeah, and I think you do look at some of the safeties that are hitting the market and what they're going to fetch. That's where I think you do look at Weddle and say, I don't know if he's going to have the market that's going to make him whole in terms of what he's scheduled to make this year. So do you work out a pay cut with some incentives? Hey, if the guy earns it, then gladly you pay him more. But
everybody loves Eric Weddle. Let's get that
this isn't a case of disliking the player, but every player has a value. And when you look at what he's scheduled to make, when you look at what a Michael Crabtree's scheduled to make, I mean, Jimmy Smith tops that list easily. I mean, without Flacco in consideration anymore, Jimmy Smith has the highest cap figure on this football team right now. And considering how rarely he ever plays 16 games and that he's on the wrong side of 30, that's not tenable to me. So do you work out a pay cut with him? Do you work out maybe a very modest short-term extension that lowers his cap figure if you want to keep him around for another year or two? I'm inclined to say maybe you try to trade Jimmy Smith, and maybe you can get an early day 3 pick for him when you consider his salary at a 1-year type of deal, and any other team that would acquire him is not going to have all the prorated portion on the cap. He might be a little bit more of an asset, a modest asset, but an asset that you can look to trade and then kind of say, well, Marlon Humphrey's our number 1, and we're going to keep Brandon Carr, and we have other guys like Anthony Averett and Tavon Young and Maurice Kennedy, and we'll probably draft another corner. Then you kind of move forward that way. So until the Ravens make those decisions, it's really difficult to try to predict just how active they're going to be in the free agent market. I mean, we know history suggests usually less than what you anticipate is the way that it goes with the Ravens. Not that they haven't made some signings, but again, they could clear quite a bit of cap room if they want to, or it could be more than they've had in recent years, but still modest, still on the modest side. So again, how bold does DaCosta want to be in trying to shape this roster? And he'll speak at the Combine next week, and we'll react to that. And maybe he'll tip his hand a little bit on a couple players, but we might just have to wait a few more weeks to really see how bold, how different this team's going to look compared to how it's looked over the last few years.
All that, and I never even said the words Manny Machado. I'll save that for you. And my San Diego Padres. I'm getting my Tony Gwynn jersey yet. I'm going to wear my Gwynn jersey for that one. Luke Jones can be found, Luke at WNST.net, along with me out in the buyatoyota.com audio vault, and always out on Twitter and Facebook and LinkedIn and Snapchat and all of those great places. All of our friends at the Model Lyric. Boy, it's been a big week down there between John Mellencamp, as well as I had a big soul show there last Friday night with the Manhattans and the Delphonics. Had a beautiful night. Let's see. I'm going through the schedule. I've had Tom Johnston from the Doobie Brothers on this week. They're there April 12th. Britt Floyd on May 2nd. The Frank Zappa Hologram Show is May 3rd. Bill Maher's coming on June 9th. JoJo Siwa June 12th. And don't forget, George Lopez March 2nd. Tickets are $29.50 for that on the wall. We had George Lopez on as well. And the guys from Kansas carrying on. They rescheduled the show from November into March. It's March 1st, Kansas at the Modell Lyric. Learn more. There's always magic at modell-lyric.com. I got to get a Modell Lyric coffee cup. I'm going to get on Nicolette and John and get that done. Don't forget our friends at Sporticulture. My man Court there says they're talking about lava lamps. He said he's going to get me a purple lava lamp here for the studio. So I'm looking forward to that. Sporticulture and sporticulture.com. They do flowers and they're lovely, and this time of the year they smell really nice, and you can learn more at sporticulture.com. Also, our friends at the Lee Tessier team. I had lunch with Lee Tessier. He's on the cover of this magazine. I learned a lot about him too, because Tessier taking over. So I learned. I didn't know he sold cars. I got to talk to Lee Tessier about that. They're selling my home. They can sell your home as well. Lee and I talk about like Tony Robbins and all sorts of cool stuff. And he was the man of the year for Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which is how I met him 5 years ago. Now my wife's a 5-year survivor here, coming up on that sometime soon. Go to leetessier.com to learn more about what they do to sell homes, buy homes, get you involved, and treat you like family. That's the way we get the treatment with Lee Tessier and leetessier.com. Learn more there. All right. Luke can be found, Luke at WNST.net. I'm Nasty at WNST.net. Don't forget, if there's any breaking news at all, you get it first on the WNST Tech Service. It's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday from 3 until 5. Speaking of cars, Dennis sells cars at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard, and they sponsor our WNST Tech Service. He's here 3 to 5. It is the SSV on WNST. I am Nestor. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.